Here with the Rainier Avenue Radio Traffic Update. You can listen to us in your car 24/7 anytime by downloading the free TuneIn app. Once you do, search Rainier Avenue Radio. And remember, do not curse out your fellow drivers. This has been your Rainier Avenue Radio Traffic Update.
Struggling to pay your mortgage? If COVID-19 hurt your family's health, you may be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. Call 1-877-894-4663 now or visit washingtonhaf.org. That's washingtonhaf.org. Because getting sick does not have to mean losing your home.
Hey, this is Paul Pearson. I've hosted the R&B show Star Time since the very beginning of Rainier Avenue Radio, and after years of featuring tracks from the 50s through the 80s, Star Time now plays R&B and hip-hop from the 1990s as well. A whole half-century of soul, funk, hip-hop, and more on Star Time, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Mga kaibigan, ito po si Kuya Bert Kawili.
And this is Miles Salvador from Australia.
And I'm Norb Kawili, also known as Norbcam.
Kung gusto niyo po ang latest news and events from the Philippines at the local Filipino community, PhilAm Radio po.
We play Filipino music and interview guests from all around the world.
And I'll keep you updated on the latest Seahawks and sports news.
Kaya always tune in. PhilAm Radio every Tuesday, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Pacific Time on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
And in YouTube and Facebook. Salamat po.
Are you a small business owner in Seattle who was impacted by COVID-19? The Seattle Office of Economic Development is investing $8 million to connect small businesses to operating capital. The Small Business Capital Access Program will lower the cost of Washington State Small Business Flex Fund loans by paying down 25% of the loan principal. Eligible small businesses can borrow up to $150,000 with a 4% interest rate to cover expenses like payroll, rent, utilities, and supplies.
Would you like to see when your favorite Rainier Avenue Radio show comes on? Check out our show schedule, updated weekly at rainieravenue.world.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Juan, Cotto, and Mick Hoffman, the Executive Director of the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association. On a big day, Mick, while we are doing this, the Seattle Mariners are taking on the Houston Astros in Houston, and my last check, it was a 6-3 Mariner lead. How exciting, and I know as the activities director for our state, I know there's a lot of excitement about the Mariners right now.
Yeah, I'm hoping there's some work getting done in the office. Yeah, good. I mean, what a great story so far. So this is the epitome of sports. As I parked and I'm walking in, there's an open air restaurant over here, and I'm walking by and you hear this huge groan, and it was JP after he hit his home run the next time they got him. And you know, there's not a lot of things that get random people in the community to one spot all on the same page. It's pretty awesome.
It is so exciting right now here in the city of Seattle, and wherever you are listening from, we hope you are enjoying, whether it's Major League Baseball, whether it's high school football. I have some good friends in Texas who are listening in on us today. Before I get started, and you know I will, a couple of things we want to point out on your community radio station, our community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Tonight at 6 o'clock, there will be a debate between Lisa Mannion and James Farrell. Lisa Mannion, she is the assistant King County prosecutor, has been working in the office for several years. She came through the primary. Mayor Farrell of Federal Way is the opponent. So we have two candidates who will discuss an issue that sometimes goes down the ballot a little bit, and we need to hear the issues of the King County prosecutor, very important position, and a large budget that they oversee, and also obviously in our community up here in King County, the ability to prosecute crime. So they're going to discuss that tonight at 6 o'clock. We have Cindy Laws who will be moderating that debate, and she's always good and really knows the issues. It's going to be a fantastic. So we hope that you will go ahead and tune in at 6 p.m. tonight. Also a new show, The Coach, John Yasutaki. What's cooking in Columbia City? A show that's going to really focus on something that's so important, small businesses. So we're really excited to see The Coach come out and put together a new show that's really going to emphasize an important aspect in the Columbia City neighborhoods right now, but certainly up and down the Rainier Avenue corridor. Then on Saturday, yours truly, it's going to be kind of see what happens with that Mariners game is. My son may have a ticket for me for the Mariners game. We'll see how that all works out. But a big contest in its own right. The Garfield Bulldogs are taking on the Rainier Beach Vikings. And let me tell you something. If you love speed and quickness, we have Caleb Presley, the University of Oregon commit for the Rainier Beach Vikings. Obviously, Coach Corey Sampson does a tremendous job. And you saw Garfield a little earlier this year when they were taking on Seattle Prep. They have an outstanding football team. Both teams highly ranked in the 3A area in the state of Washington. It is a contest right up there with the Mariners and the Houston Astros. That's going to be 2 o'clock from Memorial Stadium. Mick, high school sports in full swing in the fall. How are things going at WIAA right now?
Yeah, going well. I mean, we're not negotiating to get to play every week with the Department of Health, so that's nice. Smoke's been an issue. There some guidelines have changed, but ADs and schools are finding ways to make games happen. But yeah, kids are playing, and we're back to regular business. And I said all through COVID, when we're dealing with our regular issues, I wasn't going to complain. So I have nothing to complain about.
Just out of curiosity, because we earlier this year, I want to say about a month ago, we had a game that was canceled. It was on a Saturday, and the smoke played a role in that. And obviously, that's a district issue, and it's also a state issue overseas. What are the rules on that? What do you measure in the air, and how do we protect our kids?
Yeah, the state DOH comes out with some guidelines. They call it AQI, and there's a couple different measuring tools, and they switched it this year. It's more focused on the particulates, but the number when essentially there's a number 150, and from 100 to 150, it's people who have some health sensitive issues can be impacted. Above 150, we're all there. So now the recommendation is to cancel at 100, where it used to be at 150. So schools used to have the option between 100 and 150 to be able to identify their students. I mean, schools are really good about, finding out health concerns and parents sharing that about their students to help protect them. So the threshold has come down. It's a large debate in the medical community right now. The risk management groups that guide our school districts are saying they need to follow the Department of Health guidelines similar to COVID. So that's why we're seeing a more conservative approach. I just was involved in some emails over the weekend between some doctors and the Department of Health getting back together to discuss that. So
I bet nobody who's outside is complaining about this extended summer that we're having in the Greater Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, ironically, if it would rain one day, we'd play more games. How sad is that? But yeah, what a great fall.
Let's just hold that thought until November, and I'm sure we're going to see some rain. And bumper shoot is always a good investment in this town. Curricular versus co-curricular. And so my audience, they will sit down, our audience. I'm referring to myself as they're probably laughing that, geez, Juan's going to talk about something co-curricular and curricular. But it's really interesting in terms of athletics in the state of Washington. We're one of the states that has private schools playing against the public schools. So we have that aspect of it. We have some schools that are in wealthier communities and obviously they have wealthier situations, and they have more invested into their educational. I was down in southwestern Washington this year, and we were at a community baseball tournament, and it was a high school that looked like a small community college. And I always joke with friends of mine who have kids at Issaquah. When you go over to that community, when I've been over there and spent some time, what a beautiful campus that is, as opposed to some of the Seattle public schools. Although, in their own right, the Seattle public schools have definitely stepped up in terms of the facilities and given the kids a beautiful, clean building to go to school in, and also an opportunity to participate in sports. But we know that sometimes that there are certain districts that put a little more emphasis on the athletic side of that. So in your role, how do we maintain a sense of equity?
Yeah, I mean, we try to do it through the classification system, which is probably, there's a long history of this, and where equity was based on similar size schools playing, and just for the factors that you shared, that's not realistic, right? Just because you're the same size doesn't mean you have the same advantages or disadvantages or challenges. So then we went to a balanced one, which really exasperated that, where we tried to put 64 schools in each bracket or each classification to get a 16-team tournament. So now we're at a hybrid of that, to where we have hard numbers, but we added a component around free and reduced lunch. So basically, there's enough research that there was determined poverty, all right, the challenge of funding, the experiences students have if their families aren't as well off, impacts their development in especially those middle school and early high school years. And so schools now can reduce their student count based on their free and reduced count being below the state average. And so we're tracking that. Last year was our first year of play. So we tracked all the outcomes of that, not just of our seating committees, but also for schools that adjusted based on that. We also see schools that opt up, and several schools in the Metro Conference are an example of that. They opt up because, you know, their talent level, their coaching level, the outcomes that they want to play at that 3A or 4A level. So it's a very unique challenge. And what I'm learning in this job is not all private schools are built the same. It's amazing how different they are. And last year we actually had accusations of public schools recruiting private schools, which is totally the opposite of what you think coming from a public school situation. So it's a fascinating puzzle. I love puzzles. We have not cracked it yet. We're working on it. Our classification committee is looking at all that data now and going to make some recommended tweaks, I think, through our amendment process. But yeah, there's definitely communities that have the means and put the value into that, into facilities and opportunities beyond the school day. And there's some that just aren't able to do it, and there's some that find a way. So,
in your position, this is a man I'm sure that loves puzzles. I'm sure you must have a collection of Rubik's cubes and other solvable things that force you to really stretch your minds. I know certain things that come up to your desk are indeed puzzles, and you do such a good job of mediating those out.
Depends who you ask.
Indeed. The private school versus public school debate, and this is something that I have a really good friend, Will Sanchez, who comes from the East Coast. He's from New York City. And in New York and some of the larger populations back east, the private schools are separate from the public schools. And they have the private school championships and the public school championships. And he shakes his head and he says, geez, how in the world are the public schools and the private schools doing this in the state of Washington?
Yeah.
And for those of us who grew up here, I mean, it's always been somewhat equitable. So like in the more recent past, the private schools have had some success on the field, but it's been somewhat equitable. And we're all kids who grew up and we've known each other. And certainly has there been some incidences where we've seen some things go on, sure, at the private school level and also at the public school level.
Yeah.
But at the same time, tell us about this unique arrangement in Washington State, and how does that impact participation and people's perceptions of athletics?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really thankful that we all play against each other, right? That we don't have separate associations. It gives our students a chance to experience very different environments as players. It gives our coaches a chance to learn more about these environments. I think the way it works is we're self-governing for the most part. I mean, we're a governing agency, but for the most part, the rules are meant to be enforced on the integrity of those programs. And there's rules in place. I just dealt with the conversation today of a school up suspecting another school of not enforcing the rules the way they should be. So there's a process that they can bring that forward, and we then join in and help with the investigation and the communication. And so I think that's why it works. And, the private schools, independent schools are very unique individually, and they don't always get along. Mm-hmm. Some of the more intense conversations I'm involved in a lot of times are independent to independent, just based on the philosophical differences of those. I mean, Russell Wilson has started one, a Why Not You charter, and from some very traditional, a religious-based private schools. So I think it works because the schools monitor each other, hold each other accountable. And then when that starts slipping, then there's an agency like us to be able to come in, intervene, and help bring awareness and then resolution to that. So yeah, it's very unique when I talk to my counterparts. When we also have middle schools, which also involves several private middle schools. We allow 8th graders to play up in small schools. So we have a lot of unique rules, and in our mission statement, we speak to all students in Washington. And so, it's an honor to be part of an organization that actually walks that talk. And so is it easy? No. And is there a perception that private schools have advantages and dominate? In some ways, But I will tell you, as students get older at that junior and senior level, Running Start, where a lot of families are getting savvy for some free college, especially with the cost of tuition, you don't get that at a private school, right? Because the funding comes from the state. They don't get that funding. So if they're sending a student to Running Start, they're paying out of pocket, where a public school isn't getting the funding from the state in their bank. It's going to that university, but it's not costing them anything other than the FTE they'd earn if they were serving the student. So there's some nuances just to the way the state of Washington set up that makes this work.
Going back to the classification process and using that as a way to determine if a school is in the right, how should I put it, the right area for equitable participation. Yeah. And obviously in some sports it's going to vary, but let's just say for equitable participation, who's in control of that process? Is that something that the parents take to the athletic director? Is that a district discussion? Who makes a determination of where a school is going to sit in those classification areas?
Yeah.
And what's the process if they do want to move up or move down?
Yeah. So online, WIAA.com, we have our handbook, right, which explains it in great detail if there's anybody really interested in the details. But essentially the way it works we have our classifications are set with hard numbers, right? The range of student count and whether they're 9 through 11 or in what years we count and all that. So those details are in there. Where we get those numbers, which is the key. So for public schools, it comes from the state, OSPI. So they publish those numbers, funding's based on that. So there's not an incentive for public schools to cheat on those numbers, because if they do that, it's going to cost them money. Every one of those students is worth X amount of dollars in their funding, and that's how they fund schools beyond levies and bonds. The private schools, it's an honor system, right? So this is one where sometimes people go, hey, wait a minute. But at the same time, they have to disclose numbers, and any school could challenge that school's count if they wanted. And honestly, we have not seen that as an issue. We have. I'm not being naive. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but we see a lot of our private schools opting up anyway from their count, and so it's not really an issue. So that's where the numbers come from. The other piece of that, like I said, is you can back out equal percentage up to 40% on your free reduce, and then alternative programs that have a separate number from OSPI that are true alternative schools, they don't factor in the count because research shows less than 2%, really almost about 1% of them participate. So if you have an art school, art-based school, school-based to help high special needs, those students don't count. They still get to play, but it's about 1%. So to try to get to a true competitive equity, who's really drawing from what students and what barriers are they facing to be able to participate? We have this process now that, as it's been evaluated over the last 4 years, most people find that it's as close as we've gotten in our 100+ year history. So it's not perfect by any means, but we're getting closer. State of California, they reclassify every sport in every school every year. And the southern section down there, so where you're talking, I think they have about 1,600 high schools in the San Diego, LA area. They their football teams don't even know what classification they're playing at till halfway or so through the year. Wow. So your football team could be 1A, and your volleyball team could be 4A, and your soccer team could be 2B based on how you've done that year. I don't think our state's quite ready for that, but we're monitoring and watching. So
only 1,600 schools.
Yeah, exactly. And they used to do it, which was interesting. They used to do it every other year, every 2 years. And they said, no, because now we're counting on the players. You get a good class come through and graduate, and all of a sudden your next class is being held to that level, whether it's up or down. And now, so they're going every year. So we're watching it closely to see how that works. So there's some pretty radical ideas out there. We've continued to refine our current process. And for the most part, we're seeing some teams make the playoffs that haven't made them in the past, not necessarily winning state championships, but playing. We're having, we think, less running clocks. We don't have good data on that aspect. And we're getting far less complaints, which is a lousy way to measure, but it's real. And so in our schools, it means a lot to them. So they're going to tell us if we're missing the mark.
He is Mick Hoffman. He is the executive director of the Washington State Interscholastic Activities Association. I'm Juan Cotto. I am a local radio personality or Rainier Avenue Radio personality. Our community radio station, your community radio station. And we are on WIAA I believe the show is called Primetime now. Is that correct? I believe it is. WIAA Primetime with Mick Hoffman, who we sit down and we have conversations about what is going on with our kids and the athletics through this great system of athletics and interscholastic activities called the Washington State Interscholastic Activities Association, which he oversees and manages. Rainier Avenue Radio this weekend, if you like sports, we have the Rainier Beach Vikings taking on the Garfield Bulldogs, 2 o'clock on Saturday. We're going to go ahead and have a great ball game there with Coach Corey Sampson and his group of Vikings led by Caleb Presley. And if you like great players who are coming through Washington State, here's another one who's going to go down to the University of Oregon, which I know makes the Husky fans happy. And then obviously the Bulldogs have a ton of athletes on that team. C.J. Camillon, their young quarterback, and a group of aggressive Bulldogs have come out and really set the scene for their 100th, the centennial year for Garfield High School. So great game on Saturday. Tonight at 6 o'clock here at the beautiful Columbia City Theater, we have a debate for the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and that's Lisa Mannion, who is an assistant DA in the office, is running against Jim Farrell, who is the mayor of Federal Way. Should be a very, very entertaining conversation led by Cindy Laws, who does a wonderful job of asking questions and really getting to some of the root issues and tying into this community, especially here in Southeast Seattle. But if you're interested in politics throughout the county, this should be a great opportunity to hear from the candidates. And then after that, tonight at, I believe it is at 9 o'clock, the coach, John Yasutaki, he is going to talk and bring on his new show, What's Cooking in Columbia City, looking at small business issues, which are a very, very important topic here. And that's going to be at 9 o'clock. And whenever John Yasutaki does a show, you'll love it. So it should be a lot of fun. Mick, the co-curricular and curricular activities that we talk about in terms of academics. And there is, I remember coaching football, there was a 5-week process. So we could elect to have a young person who struggled academically in the spring and they want to come out for football in the fall. And we could make a deal with them, and then we would check their grades after 5 weeks, and if they were showing up for practice, and if their grades had improved, we would let them go out and play in October. And I'm sure that a number of coaches are probably going through that right now. We really thought that was an important part of giving a young person an opportunity to participate. So you have that aspect of academic awareness. Just some of the rules to make sure that we get kids out on the field. Now, just wondering, and some of those are at the district level, but a number of those are also overseen by the WIAA. And I'm just wondering in regards to coming up with ways that we keep kids on the field rather than looking at ways to take them off.
Yeah. Well, a great example of that is we just had a rule change this year. So going back to the rule you talked about when you're coaching football, students now don't start ineligible for grades. As long as they completed the school year, the year before, even with straight Fs, they're given a window now. I think it's 3 weeks. I'm the worst guy with the rules, believe it or not. We have a great staff who keep me out of trouble. But they have a window of time to get their grades up. So I think it's the first 5 weeks. It essentially is 3 weeks of the school year. And if their grades then are passing whatever the school district requires, the WIA, we require you just passing 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7. You can be failing one class. Some school districts require no Fs or no Ds or Fs or 2.0. All schools have the ability to raise that level if they so choose. So now your students start off eligible because, and the philosophy of that is, hey, we know if they're connected with good adults coaching and they're out there with their peers, that we're more likely to be able to get them to class. And we saw it during COVID, right? We've talked about this a couple times. Superintendents saying, hey, when are you going to start playing? We need to get students back to counted for our funding and our mission of educating. And so we've changed that, which I think has turned out our feedback we've gotten so far is very positive. More kids engaged coming back than disengaged, what we've seen historically.
So that's exciting because it sounds like the rules and the spirit of the rules, as they should, they're benefiting the student.
Exactly.
And making sure they're having the opportunity to at least when they're coming in, get the opportunity to participate.
Yeah. Well, and our working philosophy is if it's a coin flip on the decision, it goes to the student, right? And so, matter of fact, I got a little coin in my pocket that this year's board president, Scott Chamberlain out of Shelton, made. One side of it is who we represent. The other side is what we represent. And he said he checks us all the time at board meetings or any other Zoom meetings to make sure we have it, including the board, so we don't forget who and what we represent. And that was a rule that came through this amendment process, right? We don't get to make the rules. So we had membership do it out of the Tacoma area primarily. And then we help explain it across the state. They vote on it, they pass it, we implement it, and it's gone seamlessly to date. So, that's one of the things. The other piece is because of the reason for that is there's a ton of research that shows the value of education-based activities, right? So a student will attend 21 more days out of 180 because coach is expecting him or her to show up and their teammates are counting on them, and it's fun. The teen pregnancy rate in juvenile crime goes way down for students who are involved. It's like 40-some%, 30-some% for both of those, because the most critical time for a young person is from like 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., right? You'd think it's Friday night, Saturday night, but from 2 to 5, they're out of school. Mom and dad, traditional jobs, are working or busy during the day, and they're kind of on their own. They're with their friends to end their school day, and what do they go do? And so by supporting this, and realistically, a total budget commitment of a school district is less than 2% to fund a comprehensive education-based activities program, not just athletics, but activities. So you think about the money schools put into retention programs and recovery programs. As a former assistant superintendent, it's a big ticket item. And you put 2% in a proactive way that hooks students with things they love to do. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? And so fortunately in the state of Washington, we have school districts that do that.
In the state of Washington, obviously, there are two sports that dominate and have the tradition that just about in any statewide high school athletic situation. And let's move the activities for a second. Football and basketball dominate. Yeah. And those get most of the attention. They're very, very popular sports. Baseball is off to itself in the spring, but football and basketball are the ones that tend to garner the most attention. How do we balance out the participation in the other sports? Your cross country athletes, your track and field athletes, your esports athletes now, which is becoming so popular. Yeah. And how are the policies and the guidelines that protect the integrity of the academics for those students?
Yeah, they're all under the same rules, right, as far as academics and requirements. So what we do as an association is we work really hard to equally promote, right? Track is actually the #2 participant sport in the country, let alone Washington, because basketball, you have 12 or 15 on a team, so you might have 3 teams, maybe 4 if you're lucky. There's a lot of track programs that have 200 kids, 150 kids. So it's one of those that we don't think about much because it's a individual sport for the most part, but it's a huge participant sport in the spring, and it's one that no matter what your athletic interest or abilities are, there's a place for you in track. I mean, if you can't run well, you can probably throw the shot put or the javelin. There's technique, there's given gifts that you can utilize. So we try to promote. You look at our athletes of the week, now our teams of the month and all that. We are trying to find a variety of sports and interests so we're intentional with that. So students see those sports. The golfer gets the same recognition as the football player on our social media.
It's really interesting that we always have discussed the carrot versus the stick as a motivational metaphor. But in athletics, what I notice as a coach, and I'm sure you may as well, it isn't like you're holding a stick and motivating the kids. The kids are pretty motivated when they come in. Yeah. And I think there's a sense of maturity sometimes that we forget that this really does lend to better athletic development, as you were describing those other statistics that you were mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, our rules are written for about 2% of the people. 98% of the people are there because they love what they're doing, what they want to do, and they're doing it the right way. So it's unfortunate that 2% can cloud that, and unfortunately that's what a lot of times becomes known publicly. But 98% are showing up every day, working hard, having a great time, and outperforming their peers.
Mick Hoffman, the executive director of the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association. I am Juan, Cotto, Rainier Avenue Radio host, and we are on Rainier Avenue Radio, ladies and gentlemen. I am just really, I can actually reach out, touch it. I'm so close here at the Columbia City Theater, the historic Columbia City Theater. And we're glad to be with you discussing these issues. And in the back of my mind, I'm wondering what the score of the Mariners game is. Mick, the protection and the integrity of our athletes. I mean, that's basically what the conversation is about. Just your final thoughts in regards to you know something, we're going to come back. I'm going to hold that thought when we come back, and we're going to go to a break right now on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
I'm Paul Pearson, host of Star Time, and when I'm not hearing men compare women to residential real estate, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
And welcome to our live studio audience for another exciting edition of Did You Know? And here we go with round one. Did you know?
The COVID vaccine is free and easy to get. You don't need insurance or an appointment to get your vaccine. Vaccines are available at many locations near you.
And now we're going to double the value. Did you know?
The COVID-19 vaccine is always free of cost. You can visit pharmacies, community health centers, and other health providers in your neighborhood.
And now for the lightning round. Did you know?
The Delta variant of COVID is a mutation that has health experts worried because it's twice as contagious.
Then for our finale. Did you know?
The best way to protect yourself from the COVID Delta variant is to get fully vaccinated. Get your vaccine today.
Find out more at kingcounty.gov/vaccine. Did you know?
What's going on, world? It's your boy OG Mambo
and your guy D Money. Join us along with Pint Size Patron and ID Yourself
here on Fresh Juice at Rainier Avenue Radio
every Wednesday hump day from 9 to 11 Pacific.
Get exclusive interviews from your favorite artists, all the hottest music, and updates on what we got going on in the world.
That's every Wednesday, 9 to 11 p.m. on Seattle's Rainier Avenue Radio.
This is Big Poppy, host of Jazz from the Cabinets. Join me each week for a listening tour of the first century of jazz, an eclectic mix of Dixieland, big band, cool jazz, bebop, contemporary jazz, world jazz, all in all forms. That's Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy on Rainier Avenue Radio, streaming worldwide on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
COVID-19 hurt my income, my health, and my family. We were about to lose our home when we heard we might be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. We called 1-877-894-HOME, and a housing counselor stepped in, talked to our lender, and saved our home. Federal funding details at washingtonhalf.org. That's washingtonhaf.org.
Rainier Avenue Radio. Rainier Avenue Radio.
With numbers and strategies, problem solving.
We are back on our community radio station, your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is Mick Hoffman. He is the executive director of the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association. I'm Juan, Cotto, Rainier Radio personality and host, and also the voice of baseball in the spring. But Saturday night, I will be at Memorial Stadium watching the Rainier Beach Vikings take on the Garfield Bulldogs. That's at 2 o'clock. And that's going to be an outstanding football game. You saw Garfield really take apart Seattle Prep earlier this year at Lumen Field. Outstanding football team. B.J. Kenyon, great quarterback, great collection of skill players, and certainly will be a lot of fun. They also play a lot of defense. And they're going to take on a big-time challenge. Coach Corey Sampson, Coach Quentin Jackson, and his dynamic offense, and obviously one of the top players in the state of Washington, Caleb Presley, who's an Oregon commit. And that's going to be an exciting football game. That's going to be 2 o'clock on Saturday on your community radio station, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Tonight at 6 o'clock, we have a debate for the King County Prosecutor's Office. We have Cindy Laws, and Mr. Hoffman here pointed out, what a great name to have as a moderator in a King County prosecuting debate. Cindy Laws moderating with Lisa Mannion, who is running against Jim Farrell, Lisa, an assistant DA in the prosecutor's office at King County, versus the mayor of Federal Way, Jim Farrell. And it's going to be a really good conversation about issues going on from the prosecuting attorney's office here in King County, discuss how that office works, and really here, this is important as the election season is coming up at the end of the month and heading towards November. We really have to have people involved in these elections, and we need you to get out and vote. So if you haven't done so, please sign up to do that. Then at 9:30 tonight, and I may have misspoke earlier, 9:30 this evening, the coach, John Yasutaki, has a nice new show coming up called What is Cooking? What's Cooking in Columbia City? And they're going to discuss small businesses and different issues going on up and down the Rainier Avenue corridor with a focus on a variety of different businesses and ways that you can get involved to support your community small business, which is the backbone of our economy all throughout our country, but certainly right here on the Rainier Avenue corridor. Mr. Hoffman, let's talk tournaments. Let's talk the opportunity to create a successful tournament, what that entails, the opportunity to give the different classifications and schools from classifications all over the state. Tell us the overall philosophy, if you will, the guiding philosophy of how we run successful tournaments in the state of Washington.
Yeah, our basic philosophy is any student at any level gets the same experience at a state event. And so we know sometimes those local levels, like you talked about, that there's different levels of facilities that they play at early on, but by the time they get to those final rounds or the state culminating events, we want it to be equal. Now, that being said, on the east side of the state, Inchelium just put in a beautiful turf field. There's one at Royal. So there's some small towns on the east side that are starting to create that opportunity. So again, we want every student to walk away. It's an opportunity to create a positive lifetime memory that they're never going to forget. And the only way they remember it is if there's some type of emotion that hits them, right? And so the emotion that's created by however we can put that event together and what they experience is what they're going to remember, and that's what we're here for.
Take us through the mechanics of a tournament. Obviously, it's to determine the best player, at least in theory. We get the best either individual performer or we get the best team in a sport. How do we go about setting these up, and how do we go about picking out the locations for the tournaments? What is the magic formula? How do the districts get involved? How do we really from soup to nuts? How do we get started?
So the leagues they run their events during the year and they figure out their order. At the state level, what we do is we collect information 3 weeks into every season of how many teams or individuals are playing in each sport. And then from that is what we decide the sides of the tournament, right? So if there's at least 50 schools participating in a sport, they get a 16-team tournament. If there's 70, I think it's 83 or more, they get a 20-team tournament. And then it scales down. As long as there's 20 teams, they get a tournament. Otherwise, we combine them. So that's how we figure out how many allocations go in. And then those allocations are done by the math of the number of teams. It's all proportional to the number of teams in each of the 9 WI districts. The districts can go out and combine if they want and run like District 3 and 4 do a lot of times. Some of the small schools in this region, District 2, combine with other West Side ones. And they determine who they send to the state events. A lot of people don't understand that. A lot of times, they complain to us about how the tournaments are structured. But it's really up to these regional, what we call WI districts, 9 of them to decide. They got their own board. They have their own district directors. They're self-governing as well. So it's kind of a subset. Think of it like if we're the U.S. government, they're the state government deciding who they're sending back to D.C. So we start with that. While they're sorting all that out through their league play and their district play, we're working out ahead of it. We send out RFPs to the statewide. Some will send directly to entities that we know have expressed interest in hosting. And so then communities go to work on putting together a bid, or a school can go to work on putting a bid together to host. And we evaluate those bids. We look at facilities, like everything from parking to concessions to restrooms to what they're going to charge us to accessibility for others. And then we make a recommendation to our board, and our board makes a final decision on where we go play.
The sports obviously are different, and obviously you talked about the size of track teams, and I've been to the track tournament down in Tacoma one year, and just how big an event that was. But also they require a number of volunteers.
Absolutely.
So how does the WIAA recruit volunteers to work some of these events as well?
Yeah, I mean, our volunteers are the backbone of our tournaments, essentially. So what we do is, one, there's a lot who are just there that have been there and they recruit. It's fun. I mean, you get to see students at their best. But we hire tournament managers. A lot of times they're local athletic directors or coaches or somebody who's familiar. Pat McCarthy up here, Seattle Public Schools athletic director. He's a tournament manager for several events for us in this region. And we pay a very nominal stipend. You compare what they make per hour, it's like a coach. It's a very nominal stipend, and then they go out and recruit people who are also willing to volunteer their time for a very nominal compensation. And because they love and they believe in what we're doing, it's like why we have officials, it's why we have coaches. They don't do it for a living. If they do, they're living very humbly. They do it because they love to give back, they love to be a part of it, they love to be front and center in what's going on. So we're working right now with a lot of our partners to do a better job of providing, I was negotiating contracts today before I came, for some gear for these volunteers. Last year was my third year in this job. First year we ran spring sports. And as I went around the state and watched those spring sports, especially track, I mean, there's almost 250 volunteers in Tacoma, almost 200 over at Eastern running that track meet. When I went around, they are all in WI gear of some kind. And I looked at some of it, and it was weather and it was worn, and they were so proud to be a part of the WI. So it was, you know, for as much grief as we take, it's great to see that, to realize people actually want to be a part of it for what we stand for, right? We stand alone when we got to make tough decisions. We understand that. I signed up for that. I get it. But people want to be a part of providing that opportunity for students. So we're finding a way to take care of those volunteers a little bit, just show a little more love and appreciation for the time they give.
How do we get football and basketball right?
What do you?
And I say this because and I was as a former coach, but also hearing it from parents, current parents, and former players. You know, the opportunity to make sure that we get the two teams who are the best in the final rather than having them meet in the quarterfinal.
Yeah,
example,
absolutely.
As we've seen over the years.
Trust me, we want that. It sells more tickets, right? It's a better environment.
Right.
No, totally agree. So here's what we're doing now. We think we've gotten a lot closer to that. So it used to be we had a formula was a blind draw, right? With all these stipulations, you know, Beach and Garfield aren't going to play in the first round. Then the association people pushed back, and we went away from that, and we went to this criteria. And that didn't work. Like one time, I think most of them in a blind draw, almost all the Metro were in the same quarter bracket. We had championship game was opening round. That's terrible. 9 a.m. game, you know, I mean, we don't want that. So what we do now is we have seeding committees, similar to what the NCAA tournament does, right? If they're the biggest and most highest valued revenue generating event in the country, it's probably the best system to watch, right? So we evaluated that. So what we do now is we have a committee of each league gets to nominate and put forward a representative to sit on that. So we'll use football, for example. There's 6 classifications. We'll have 6 seeding committees, one from every league in that. So when 3A football gets seeded, the Metro will have one, the GSL will have one on the east side, the GSHL will have one. They get in a room, and they've been all year, their job has been to track the 3A teams. And they go in there and they say, okay, here's what the RPI is as a starting point. Here's what these other polls say, right, that we have. Here's what we know about injuries. Here's what we know about who's been playing well. Who really is right now, do we think, the best team? And they go through that whole process as a committee to seed them out. It doesn't matter where they're coming from. None of that. You might play each other in the first round now if that's how they're seeded. Now they can tweak it once they get to it, but that committee does it. And then our staff oversees that process. So we've essentially given it to the membership, just like the NCAA tournament. Now, is it perfect? No. But we believe it's a lot better. And that's another data point we tracked last year. First time it was used across all sports. Football did it for the third time last year, and the other sports said, hey, that's better than anything we've had. Let us do it. So now everybody else is doing it. Where there are some that you kind of go, how'd that happen, right? Sure, that happened. So then we start digging in. So this year we're asking our district directors we talked about, we're asking board members, we're asking leaders from each coach association to help us monitor those rooms. So if Andy Barnes is in charge of football for us, he can't be in all 6 Zoom rooms at the same time, right? So we're going to have people in there listening. And if somebody's kind of bulldogging and overrunning the committee, then he's going to go into that room and help with the conversation to make sure everybody gets heard. So we're trying to make it as fair as we can based on the experts that the leagues are picking themselves. So we said, don't send somebody who's afraid to speak up. All right, you need advocates in the room. You pick them. So every league chooses their advocate who goes to speak for their teams. So we'll see how it goes year 2. First year, pretty successful, especially you compare it to the polls, you compare it to the RPI, and you compare it to the finish. Remarkable. Were there some head scratchers? Yes. Will we always have those? It's the beauty of sports. We're dealing with 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old students. They're going to rise and fall to the occasion. We had the number 1 volleyball team over there just go get eliminated immediately. And so, we asked questions like, what happened? Did you lose some players? It was internal issues with their teams. Wow. Is that a surprise for teenagers to have that? Heck, adults have that, right?
It happens at the professional level.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of egos. There's just a lot of interpersonal stuff. We don't know why or what, but we just know that they were in a bad place when they got there, and it impacted their play. It's terrible for them. It was great for other schools. So I don't know how you prevent that in your planning, but it's just the way it goes.
Mick, when I would go to the Tacoma Dome and I would sit with some of my fellow coaches and we would watch the state championship games, and I'm sure you probably experienced this, we would all kind of look around and we'd say, geez, look at this building full of people, and oh, look at, they have these sponsors going on, and we would count it up on our own minds, and we would think this is just generating millions of dollars for the WIAA. And that's not really the truth.
No.
It does take quite a bit of financial wherewithal.
Yeah.
We've moved some of the championships out of some of the larger venues. We're no longer playing the football in Tacoma now. But tell us about the revenue that is necessary to put on the tournaments that go on throughout.
Yeah. I mean, our budget right now just went over $5 million, right? So it's not a large, $5 million is a lot of money. But in the scheme of things, it's not what people would expect. It's not NCAA money. It's not NFL money. And 55% roughly of our revenue comes from ticket sales. Now that number's decreasing because we're generating some alternative revenue streams, right? Our attendance isn't going up significantly. We're working on it, but it's not going up significantly. So we have options of reducing expenses, finding alternative revenue streams. So that's what we're doing with our streaming. Is a perfect example of that through the NFHS network. And so which Tony and Rainier Avenue Radio. We just did site visits last week, and Tony's going to have some of his students coming out, and they're going to be brought. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling the announcement for Tony, but we want good partners. And what happens here, we said absolutely, he wants to do it. Let's do it. You guys do it all year. Why not help us out? So we're starting to do more of those things, but those big venues are going up an average of 15%. And so when you figure the cost of those are about 40% of our budget. So we make some money off of them, but right now, like our Spokane venue, we're in the midst of negotiating. We haven't come to an agreement on the contract yet because we are at a position where we could potentially lose money in that venue just based on costs. And so, that we can't have that. Wrestling's in the same situation, just based on costs. So, some of our venues are really good about negotiating, being creative. Yakima, unbelievable what they do through their sports commission, their hoteliers, chamber of commerce, municipalities. They understand the economic impact. Over $16 million comes to their businesses in the Yakima Valley from us going there. The State B basketball tournament, which we're about to, the State B basketball tournament, their own number in Spokane was it generated $4.2 million in revenue that weekend alone for their community. We cleared, after all expenses from the arena, less than $50,000. Wow. Think about that. We're paying almost $200,000 in expenses to make $50,000. It's not a terrible return on a business, right? You take that on your investments right now with the stock market. But At the same time, you know, in Yakima, we're doing double that with a smaller crowd. And so, you know, big part of my job is going out with those communities and help making them aware, and then negotiating and trying to find a way for a win-win-win for everybody, so we don't end up moving events out of areas like, you know, the Tacoma Dome for football wasn't just a cost issue. I know that's what was talked about. I mean, it was part of it, but the other piece was just the remodel is beautiful, but the sight lines for football are horrid. And so it just doesn't work. Plus, we need a new turf. So anybody got $1.5 million? I'm sure the Tacoma Dome will talk to you.
He is Mick Hoffman. He is the executive director of the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association. I am Juan Cotto. I am a personality here on Rainier Avenue Radio.world, our community radio station, your community radio station. You mentioned Tony B. He's down in Southern California doing what a dad does, visiting his daughter during Parents Week at the University of Southern California. I hope you guys are both having a good time down there. We're thinking about you, and I know I'm sure it's just as sunny down there as it is here right now. It's absolutely gorgeous weather we're having in Washington State. Thank you all so much for taking some time to listen in on the issues that we've been discussing about this afternoon. A couple of things, just housekeeping items coming up. On Saturday evening, I might just say Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock down at Memorial Stadium, the Garfield Bulldogs are going to be taking on the Rainier Beach Vikings. Coach Corey Sampson and his Vikings, led by Caleb Presley, the University of Oregon commit, taking BJ Camayong and Coach Reggie Witherspoon's Garfield Bulldogs in an event. When you have Rainier Beach and Garfield in any sport, in any activity, and it's a Memorial Stadium, it's going to be exciting. And certainly this should be a really, really good contest on Saturday, and we're looking forward to it. Rainier Avenue Radio will be there. I assume the coach, John Yasutaki, will be with me as my sidekick as we discuss and describe the game for you. We're really excited about it. Should be a good one. Tonight at 6 o'clock, we have a debate, a very, very important debate. This is for the King County Prosecutor's Office. And Dan Satterberg, the long-time King County executive, King County prosecutor, stepping down. We have Lisa Mannion, who is one of his assistants in the office, and also Jim Farrell, who's the mayor of Federal Way. They are the two candidates that came out of the primary, and they are coming down the home stretch. So important that you learn the issues. They speak to them very, very eloquently, and hopefully something will trigger inside of us all to get out and vote that first Tuesday in November. Then at 9:30 this evening, a news show. Speaking of the coach, John Yasutaki, What's Cooking in Columbia City? And I may have misspoke earlier, so I'll say it again. 9:30 tonight on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is a show that's really going to look at the small business, the economic driver of us down here, really throughout the country, but also more importantly down here in the Rainier Valley and certainly in Columbia City. And they're going to look at small businesses and restaurants and really speak to the vibrancy this brings to our community. So I'm looking forward to watching this myself, and I wish Coach Yasutaki all the best, and I'll see you on Saturday. Mick, the tournaments are such a special experience for all the kids that get a chance to participate. They're special. They're fun for the communities. And we touched on it in regards to some of the bigger venues. What is the feedback coming back from parents in particular? We know you probably hear from them in regards to their kids playing in some of the smaller yet more high school like venues. And venues that can be made very, very special. I went to a couple championship games at Sparks Stadium, and the games are so good it really doesn't matter. But what are we doing to maintain that this is a special opportunity for our kids? And we see on television, right? Kids in California playing at professional stadiums.
Yeah, you know what we're finding is more and more aren't playing at professional stadiums. So down in California, a lot of them are played at some of those high school stadiums. No, they're really nice high school stadiums, similar to what we have here. I mean, we have some really nice venues in Washington. We have heard almost nothing from parents on this issue. And typically what we hear is when it's really a negative experience. I know the first year I came in that spring, before they'd made the decision, the association made the decision to go to high school football stadiums, right? And now the Tacoma Dome. So my job was to implement coming in, right? It was great. KJR radio was all over me. The local newspapers, everybody's bashing WIAA for doing this. And then we went to those venues, and I don't know if you remember the O'Day Eastside Catholic game that year, 2 touchdowns right at the end. You're probably doing the game. And, the very next morning at 8 a.m., I'm in the office on Sunday, and the Washington State Coach Association is meeting. And I walk into the office, and there's a guy who I'd never met. I'm new. And he introduced himself as Coach Cronin from O'Day, defense coordinator. They just gave up that ball over the top the night before and lost that game. So here's a guy who you would think would have a real opinion about playing. And I asked him, I said, Coach, I got to ask you, tell me, what was it like playing there? He goes, Mick, I played in the Kingdome. I've coached at the Husky Stadium at the time. He goes, I coached at the Tacoma Dome. He said, that was the best environment that I've coached or played in yet because of the electric energy in that small, full stadium. He goes, now for some students playing on the same field that Russell Wilson is or that the Huskies are going to play on the next day, maybe that's a call. But he goes, you're asking my personal opinion? He's the guy who just lost an incredible rivalry game, and that was his opinion. So I said, hey, do me a favor. Let me know what your fans think. So I asked him. So at the end of the meeting, he came up, he goes, hey, I got to tell you, I texted with my wife. She was chasing 2 little ones around. She said it was awesome. And so, that's the feedback. Now, at the same time, we hear from coaches, and predominantly it's interesting. It's coaches on the east side for the most part. There's some west side big school ones, but they want to come to the west side and play in a huge stadium, right? It's the experience for their students because our kids get the opportunity to play in really nice stadiums on the west side. Our kids on the east side, not so much. And so it's kind of where you're at. And I have sat every year with the executive board of the Washington State Football Coaches Association and had this discussion. It's usually the Saturday of the basketball tournament. So Andy and I leave the dome. We go down there for a couple hours with the football coaches, and they don't agree on it, right? They have differing opinions. It's gotten to the point now that WIPCA, which is the Boys Basketball Coach Association, they told us pre-COVID, and we all know, when the 16 double elimination ended, that was huge. That was a big deal. And I get, as a basketball coach, I get it. And they said, this is going to shock you. But after watching the football playoffs and being there that first year, we're not sure the big venue is as important as the environment of the venue. So what we're working on is, and Tony will be able to speak to this, and whoever on the team comes out and does the games with us this year in the championship, we're working on some special things to make it an event beyond just a football game, for that whole fan experience, the whole student experience. So we'll see if we're successful. So that's where our focus and energy is. I mean, in all honesty, when you talk numbers, I mean, the Seahawks didn't even bid on it this year. They just said the number is going to be so high that it's not even worth us putting a bid. Jen Cohen and her team made a really hard run at it. They could guarantee us dates this year and next year, but somebody was going to play. Could you imagine Garfield, Rainier Beach playing for the state championship at 9 a.m. at Lumen Field on a Friday? That's what somebody would be playing there. And is it fair to do it to the 2Bs because they're 8-man? Right. So our board said, and they couldn't guarantee dates beyond that with the realignment. The Seahawks, we just met with them again last week, continuing the conversation, moving forward, trying to find out if there's a way. They can't guarantee dates next year because it's not just, they play on Sundays, so we know we can have some time on Saturdays. But the other piece is the MLS playoffs will go back to that December model. And after this year, the World Cup being where it's being hosted over there in the Middle East. And so they're going to be back. They might have MLS playoff games that day, and they can't even offer us the stadium. So there's a lot more to it than just the money. But the money is a big piece of it because without that, we don't put baseball in Giza. We don't put softball at the rack. We have a lot of non-revenue sports that we have to share the love with. So
he is Mick Hoffman. He is the executive director of the Washington Interscholastic Activities Association. I am Juan Cotto. I am his cohort, his buddy on these shows. Thank you so much for coming, and I always appreciate your candor. I think all of us in the audience do, and we just really appreciate the fact that it really comes out when you speak. Really working to make sure that our children have a special experience in participation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I took the job, and I keep my admin credentials and my teaching credentials current, because if at some point we can't do it this way, I'm going back. The schools I taught in and the district I worked in, it was very, there's a lot of needs, and to watch students overcome challenges that they didn't create and aspire is awesome. And if we can do that through athletics, I mean, what a great job. So thank you.
Mick, thank you so much. And once again, thank you, Rainier Avenue Radio supporters. And we will see you this weekend and also this evening in some really cool events. So from Mick Hoffman, thank you so much for joining our broadcast today. Thank you.